helpful. Thank you so much, Dr. Willis and Dr. Hassan. I'll invite you both to be on camera, and we will begin our Q&A portion. Thank you both so much for those informative presentations, and the audience has been quite engaged in submitting questions. So without further ado, let's get started. A couple of easy ones to get us, or what I presume to be easy ones to get us started before we get into some more details. Dr. Hassan, there was a clarifying question around the timeline of Delta, and maybe that on your slides it appeared that Delta was happening in October of 2020, but this person was inquiring about if it was in fall of 2021. So I just wanted to see if you want to speak on the timeline of the Delta variant.
I am looking, you can hear me, right?
Yeah.
Sarah? Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I'm looking at actually the chart, and yeah, I mean, it's, do you want me to share it or at this time, or
sure,
even,
if you'd like to. Yeah.
Okay. Let's see. Okay, so we're talking about Delta here, and again, this is a graph where showing that it started early fall right here, and then it continued, I believe, from June to all the way December of 2021. Somewhere right here in end of November, when originally the Omicron was isolated in South Africa, then it started coming to USA and happening. So this is actually the time when Delta was dominant over US soil.
Great, thank you for that clarification. This next one was for Dr. Willis. Someone was interested in how they could access that application you were showing to search for different disinfectants.
Yeah, it's a great question. So unfortunately, it's not available as like an app in the App Store. So the best way to get there is just to Google List N, and then it will take you to a web page. You click on the little button, radio button that says, find a product, and it'll take you to that website. I'm told you can save it as an app. That is beyond my technical capabilities, but that is what I'm told.
Great, thank you. This next one is also for you, Dr. Willis, and someone was wondering about the approximate length of time that SARS-CoV-2 remains infective or virulent on surfaces.
Yeah, it's such a good question, and one that has really evolved, I would say, over the course of the pandemic. So it's not as simple as it might sound. A lot of factors matter, including the type of surface that the virus is on, but also the environmental conditions. So is it cold? Is it dry? All of those things are going to affect the ability of the virus to survive on surfaces. I actually don't know what if there's even a standard answer I could give. Maybe I'll ping Dr. Saad. Do you happen to know? Do you have a guess?
I totally agree with you, Kristen, that there is no standardized answer. I think in the literature, there are different claims from 1 hour to 6 hours, something like that. And also depends on the nature of the surface, whether it's a porous, non-porous, it's metal, things like that. So there is definitely, we don't have a definitive answer for that.
Great, thank you for that information. Dr. Hassan, someone was wondering how Omicron would affect a non-vaccinated person. Would Omicron be less harmful than the original alpha form of the virus to that person?
Another good question. If someone is not vaccinated, that tells me that he or she doesn't have the immune system ready to combat the incoming virus, right? So that's the first step. Now, I think the question is connected with alpha. while I was actually showing a bar graph, I think it was actually the data represented 3 strains. One is the Wuhan strain, the other one is Delta, and then the Omicron. So I assume Alpha, again, Alpha did not last pretty long. It was only a short window. Alpha did not make a case like Delta. Delta was much more severe. Bottom line is, if it is Alpha or Delta, and if someone is unvaccinated, then obviously the severity could be higher. The whole vaccine strategy is, of course, it is true that the vaccine may not be working, 100% against some of this variant, but the question is, there is always some level of protection, and that protection is essential to keep folks out of hospitals and also developing severe COVID-19. Thanks.
Great. Thank you. This one is related, Dr. Hassan, and is a multi-part question, or it's a little complicated, so I'll try to say it slowly. But is there a reasonable time frame after a natural COVID infection following immunization where waiting for natural immunity to wane prior to receiving a booster would maximize the value of receiving said booster?
Well, again, that's another area which I believe the information is still being collected. Right now, just to be on the safer side, I think whether it's a vaccination, someone has been vaccinated versus developing or infected naturally, I think the ballpark figure right now is perhaps the antibody might be lasting or staying strong in the neighborhood of for 6 months. So within the first 6 months, people feel more protected. Now, let's say if someone get a natural infection, and natural infection obviously would develop some immunity, obviously. And then the question is whether or not someone should be taking booster. That can wait. You don't have to jump in, and as soon as natural infection is over, let's say within a month or 2 months, you need to get the booster. You can wait, because as you know, natural infection would provide some immunity for several months.
Great, thank you for that nuanced answer. And these are really great questions, everyone. If you have more questions for Dr. Willis and Dr. Hassan, please keep them coming in the chat. I have a long list here to go through, but we welcome more. We have these experts in front of us. Dr. Willis, someone was wondering about that emerging pathogen claim, and if you could talk a little bit more about if it only applies for the listed pathogen.
Yeah, it's a good question. And if I had a little more time, I would have gone through the policy a little bit more. So I'm going to try to do it justice here for you. The answer is really that, the policy is intended to allow companies to pre-qualify based on a harder to kill virus. So the emerging viral pathogen claim is going to be based on that harder to kill virus. So for example, Dr. Hassan talked about the biology of the virus. I would say, luckily for us, it's one of the easier to kill viruses in terms of its biochemical makeup. So it's an enveloped virus. So those claims, those emerging viral pathogens claims, are based on viruses that are harder to kill, that are non-enveloped. So for example, the one that we kind of looked at in List N, it achieved its emerging viral pathogen claim by having data against a harder to kill virus, which was rotavirus in that case. So that's how a company would get their product pre-qualified. And then you're going to use those directions for use against the emerging pathogen, which in this case was SARS-CoV-2. I hope that helped. I know it's a little bit, it can be a little bit difficult to follow without seeing a specific example.
Great, thank you for that. And if someone wants to ask a follow-up question in the chat, please feel free and I will elevate it to Dr. Willis. Dr. Hassan, one of our participants was wanting to know if you are aware of the leading hypothesis of where Omicron came from or how Omicron came about.
Well, I decided that if I ended up receiving a tough question, I will pass this to Dr. Willis, Well, I think, again, there is no way you really can pinpoint the actual origination point for Omicron. What we know that it was sometimes in November, the first case of Omicron got isolated in South Africa. And of course, with all this mutation. Now, it could be a previous strain, and among the previous strain, it could possibly be Delta, it could be Alpha, Gamma. I don't think so we can really precisely pinpoint the exact source, like which one was the parental strain from which the Omicron actually evolved. But again, as I said, the mutation or the evolution of this, of all these variant is a natural phenomena. When virus is going through the replication process, they will develop a spontaneous mutation and they will come up with variant. There will be variant will be formed. And again, that's why probably there is also a concern among the population that if you let the virus continue to propagate through human population, then of course the likelihood of coming up with another variant will always exist. So if on the contrary, if you have a group of population who are, let's say, resistant, or they are not allowing virus to propagate, then of course the virus will not be able to go through the mutation. So again, the specific answer is we cannot probably pinpoint, but again, this is another science, the evolutionary epidemiological scientists, at some point when they analyze all the data, they probably may be able to speculate what was the original strain.
Thank you. We are nearing the end of our allotted time for Q&A, but what I want to do to make sure we get through these really awesome questions that are coming in the chat is I'm going to take a few minutes away from our closing piece because we don't need all that time and we want to get through all these questions. So I'm going to ask, I have 2 or 3 more queued up from the chat already, and I'd encourage anyone who has another question that they want to ask either Dr. Willis or Dr. Hassan, please feel free to drop that in the chat. We'll take a few more. Someone was wondering about that they have heard that vaccinated people can still spread the virus, and wondering if you could talk a little bit more about that.
If vaccinated people are infected, and let's say they are a silent carrier, there could be 2 types of, upon infection, you could either develop the symptoms or you could remain asymptomatic. The question is, as we all know now, that there are many vaccinated people also actually developed Omicron symptoms, even though they had the vaccine, including booster dose. Again, as I said all along, that obviously the severity was less, but whether they are asymptomatic or they are symptomatic, they do have a possibility. There is a potential for them to spread the virus to other folks, people. However, there is one thing I would like to add here. In every infection or every cases, when someone is getting infected and someone is coming up with symptoms versus no symptoms, these are all at the end of the day number of games of numbers. When you are asymptomatic, there could be 2 reasons. One is you could be infected, but the number of infection, number of actual viral particle in your body is too low to make you sick. That could be one. Or you may have a different type of immunity. You may have a different level of immunity. That's why your immune system is winning, and therefore even not showing any symptoms. But in either case, you might be asymptomatic, and you could still shed virus to other people. The actual number of shedding might be less as opposed to a symptomatic person, someone with a full-blown symptoms, they may actually shed more virus to other people. It's all number of gains, because viruses are multiplying in your body, and if they are actively multiplying, and at that time, if someone comes near in contact, they will be getting larger exposure. Good question.
Great, thank you. I think this is going to be our last question, unless anyone chimes in at the last minute in the chat. But for our last question, if you could talk about, does the fact that Omicron is binding to the bronchus rather than the lungs have any implications for testing?
I assume the testing means probably they're talking about rapid antigen-based testing. Not really, because upper nostrils, let's say nostrils and throat, they are the part of upper respiratory area. So, and Omicron, as I said, tend to stick in that area. So if the samples, swab samples, are collected from nostrils or the inner part of the throat, the hypothesis that you would indeed be collecting maximum number of antigen or virus particle to be able to see your to run through the rapid antigen test. Also, it's very important that when actually you collect those samples, if someone is at the beginning stage of infection, probably those rapid tests will come out negative. You really have to have a full-blown of replication going on for those rapid antigen tests to be positive. They are usually less sensitive than the actual PCR-based assay. So that's the point here. So the actual answer is no. If you collect the sample from nostril and throat, your rapid antigen test will not be affected because whether the Omicron is binding lungs or upper respiratory tract.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Dr. Willis and Dr. Hassan, for those very informative presentations and this really wonderfully engaging question and answer session. We really appreciate you taking the time to be with us today. And, you know, COVID-19 has been such a big part of the past 2 years for everyone. It's really feel fortunate to learn from two experts about what's going on and EPA's efforts in the fight. So thank you so much for being with us.